Chapter 17. The Mysterious Beach House. As Nancy wondered how she could get upstairs to investigate the room with the bullseye window, she saw Mrs. Driscoll looking hard at her, Bess, and George. "I think you've done enough searching," the woman said crisply. "You'd all better leave now." Nancy knew she could not force the issue. Disappointed, she and her friends thanked Mrs. Driscoll and went outside. "I hope those two men didn't catch up with Cecily," Bess said worriedly. George chuckled. "She had a good head start. I'm sure she doubled back and is safely locked in the cottage." The girls lingered nearby, hidden among the trees. This was the spot where they were to meet the three boys, who came along a few minutes later. "Any luck?" Nancy asked them. Ned replied, "No one came out of the house." Nancy explained what had happened, and the boys gave low whistles. "Wow," said Bert. "The Driscoll brothers really took the bait." "Yes," said Nancy. "But I wish we could have gone upstairs." Suddenly Bess warned, "Shh! Here comes Mrs. Driscoll and the twins." The six kept motionless in their hiding place. The woman did not seem to be searching for anyone, however. Yanking a child by each hand, she hurried down the bluff path and set off along the beach in the direction her husband and brother-in-law had taken. "Now's our chance," Nancy said. "If the girl is a prisoner in that house, we must set her free." She and the others hurried to the door. It was locked, as was the one to the kitchen. Nancy turned to Ned and pointed out the bullseye window, which was open. "Do you think you can toss a stone through that window?" Ned was sure he could. As the group moved through the woods toward the far side of the house, he began looking for a suitable stone. Nancy rummaged through her handbag for a piece of paper on which to write a message. She did not find any, and the others confessed that they had neither paper nor pencil. "It doesn't matter," said Nancy. "If the girl is locked in that room, she'll know the stone wasn't thrown by her enemies. There would be no reason for them to do so. I'm hoping she'll realize someone is trying to help her." Ned stood far enough back, took careful aim, and threw the stone as if it were a high forward pass. It sailed neatly through the round opening. The group below waited tensely for a response. A few minutes went by in complete silence, and they began to despair. Maybe no one was in the room. Then suddenly the stone was tossed out the window. Nancy was excited. "Someone is a prisoner in there." Bert spoke up. "I can't understand why the Driscolls didn't check the attic room before they rushed after Cecily." Nancy replied, "My guess is that Carl was so excited at seeing the red-haired girl, nothing else entered his mind except that his prisoner had escaped. He rushed down to the cellar, found Vince, and dashed to the beach through a secret tunnel. But in the meantime, Mrs. Driscoll probably was suspicious and went to the attic to find out. When she discovered the other red-haired girl still there, she grabbed the twins and went to warn the men." She stopped speaking abruptly at the sound of voices in the woods below. In a short while, the hidden group could see the three Driscoll adults and the twins coming back to the house. As they came nearer, the little boy cried out, "I wanted to play in the water!" "Shut up, you brat!" Carl Driscoll said, slapping the boy hard. The little girl began crying as she tried to comfort her brother. Mrs. Driscoll hustled them into the house, and the men followed. Nancy again thought of her secret hunch. "It's doubly important for us to get to Susan Wayne, or whoever the red-haired girl is, to learn if I'm right," she said to herself. "I'd like to sock that guy," Ned burst out, and the others nodded vigorously. Then Nancy suggested that Bess, George, Bert, and Dave station themselves to watch the house from every angle. "Ned and I will first check on Cecily. Next, we'll drive to town and tell our story to Chief Stovall. I hope he'll come and make an investigation." The couple hurried off to get Ned's car. They found Cecily in the cottage, cautioned her to keep the door locked, and assured her they would tell her everything later. The trip to Misty Lake Village did not take long. Chief Stovall was on duty. He listened patiently to Nancy's account, but was obviously skeptical. "Your evidence is pretty flimsy, Miss Drew," he said. The young sleuth reddened, but did not reply. Her blue eyes held a disapproving look, however, and finally the chief promised that he himself would come out with one of his men and look over the lodge premises. "Please, can't you come now?" she urged. The chief smiled. "You are an impatient young lady. Well, I guess we can make it." When the two cars reached the right-hand fork which led to Puddingstone Lodge, Nancy suggested that the chief wait until she checked with her friends to find out what had happened at the lodge. But the watchers had nothing to report. "No one has left the house," George announced. "That's fine," said Nancy. "The police are ready to go in." She and Ned ran back to the squad car and gave this news to the officers. "When we see you come out, we'll meet you here," Nancy said. The 6 friends stationed themselves in an evergreen grove and peered out. They saw Carl Driscoll open the door and readily admit the police. Nancy thought she detected a momentary look of fright on his face. Time dragged by. Finally, the 2 officers came out. To Nancy's consternation, they parted from the Driscolls on what seemed to be very pleasant terms. Puzzled, the whole group made their way through the woods to the spot where the police car was waiting. Chief Stovall leaned out the window and addressed himself to Nancy. "We didn't find a thing. We even broke into that locked attic room to be sure. No sign of any prisoner. Besides, those people don't seem the least suspicious. Miss Drew, I feel that you may have overstepped in this situation. You know trespassing is against the law. I warn you to stay away from the lodge. You've caused the Driscolls enough inconvenience." Nancy was too embarrassed and crushed even to argue. Chief Stovall said that he and his man had searched every corner of the house from attic to cellar. "So I'm sure you can all spend the rest of your vacation here just having fun." Despite the jolt to her spirits, Nancy politely thanked the chief for his time and effort. Then the group said goodbye. They were silent on the walk back to the cottage. Nancy's friends felt sorry for her. She had worked so hard to solve the mystery, and now everything she had achieved seemed to be crashing into bits. When they reached the cottage, Cecily was given a full account of the morning's adventures. Although disappointed, she tried hard to encourage Nancy. Bess coaxed the young sleuth to eat a good lunch, and by the time the sandwiches were finished, Nancy's interest in the case had been renewed. She suddenly burst out, "I've a hunch that the Driscolls moved their prisoner to a different hiding place. The thing for us to do is find it." "That may be very difficult," said Dave. "Do you have an idea where it is?" "Yes, I have. The beach house Simon Delaroy mentioned in his letter." "But there isn't any beach house," Bess pointed out. Nancy reminded the others that Simon had said the beach house was easily concealed. "I've suspected for some time it's actually a room connected with the cellar of the lodge and has an opening onto the beach. And all we have to do is find it," George said wryly. "Well, I'm with you, Nancy. Let's not admit defeat yet." The kitchen was tidied, then once more the 6 set off. Cecily had decided to stay at the cottage. Suddenly, Nancy mentioned the police chief's warning against their trespassing. "Maybe we're okay," George spoke up. "When I was hunting up the history of the lodge, I kept right on up to the present time. A large part of the original Wayne estate has been sold, including beach rights, to the village of Misty Lake." Nancy chuckled. "You mean that if anyone orders us off, we can counter by saying we know that the property has been sold?" George grinned. "Work it any way you like." As they walked along, Bert asked, "If the police searched the lodge from attic to cellar, why didn't they find the beach house if it's connected to the cellar?" "Because the entrance is concealed," Nancy replied. "When I was in that room in the cellar, I noticed a door behind a chest. I believe that it leads into what Simon called the beach house." They reached the edge of the woods. Ned was in the lead. "Hold it," he said. "We're not going to do any searching now. Vince Driscoll is sitting on the beach facing the bluff. I'll bet he's guarding the place." The others agreed. Although thwarted, they all were excited. Nancy's belief about a hidden room must be true. The young people waited a while, but Vince showed no signs of leaving. Finally, the girls and their escorts returned to the cottage. Frequently, they took turns walking down to the lakefront to look up at the Puddingstone Lodge beach. Vince Driscoll was still there. At sundown, they saw his brother Carl relieve him and take up the watch. Nancy wondered if the Phantom Lodge would appear, but it did not. As it grew darker, Carl produced a flashlight and kept moving it back and forth as he patrolled the beach. "I'm convinced now that he's guarding the beach to keep us away," said Nancy. "I guess our only hope is to outwait him. I have an idea." She suggested that they all join in singing and laughing, and then the boys would say in loud voices, "Good night, see you in the morning." Instead of leaving, they were to take up a watch among the trees near the beach. "Alert us as soon as Driscoll goes away," Nancy requested. The plan was carried out. The boys left and the girls turned out the cottage lights. They tried to remain awake, but could not keep from dozing off. About an hour later, they were startled out of their sleep by loud pounding on the cottage door. Nancy was the first to reach it and flung it open. Dave stood there, out of breath and excited. "Hurry! The Driscoll brothers are loading a truck. We heard them say it's for a big delivery. This is our chance to catch those crooks red-handed." End of chapter 17.